Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Reddit Roasts. I think we're on roast number 13. John, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Sam. Lucky number 13.
Lucky
Excited to
number
dive
13.
into these profiles.
Great stuff. Today I'm going to call it Unimaginative Goals Week. That's the theme of the week. We have the optional essay final boss who had every problem in the book: mugged, injured, dad died, tore a ligament, girlfriend's dad died. Just carnage. So he's going to be writing us a really long optional essay. We have a tech PM who's looking to transition to investment banking for some reason. And basically, today's theme is just people who seem to have not really thought about their goals very much. So, John, I can't wait to get stuck in. Let's get going. Profile number one. First time poster here. Hello, first time poster. Wants to get the hive mind's opinion. Not sure about hive minds, but we can definitely give our bit. Wants to know chances at M7 schools plus Stern, scholarships, and suggestions to strengthen his profile. 25-year-old, first generation immigrant Chinese American male, naturalized US citizen. Graduated from USC, bachelor's in aerospace engineering, 3.86 GPA, John, fairly solid. Master's in astronautical engineering with a 3.9 GPA. 4 years of work experience at an aerospace startup and at a well-known aerospace contracting firm. So the small and the large there. Currently a lead aerospace engineer managing a team of 10, published 2 scientific papers, GMAT focus of 675. Has some extracurriculars, but really focused on undergrad. So USC, I was the lead, the college rocket propulsion group, managed multiple rocket engine test campaigns, engineering in a co-ed fraternity, leadership position there. Nothing new, nothing now, nothing ongoing as far as I can see. Planning to get 2 letters of rec from CTO at the startup and current manager, so that's nice. Goals. Consulting, really? Long-term goal, private equity in aerospace. Cool. Targeting M7. Want to know if my profile's strong enough. Okay, John, do your thing. As a former profile evaluator with Berkeley Haas, tell us, how are you seeing this profile?
Well, I think optional essays aside, I think this is a fairly strong profile. We can talk about the goals in a little bit, Sam. But cycling through the buckets, academics, average plus, I think that's a really strong GPA. A desirable major in both undergrad and in grad. The 675 is okay. I suspect that quant score can notch up to the high 80s, and I think that would, make this, that would help round out his academic profile. So not bad, but could be better. Professional, love the experience. Rocket science, in my view, is the new 2010s perception of what software engineering is. It's kind of sexy. I feel like too often engineering roles get perceived as individual contributor roles. So it's differentiating to see him lead a team of 10. I love the progression. I love the focus. This is a strong point in this profile. Demographic, slightly overrepresented, slightly on the younger side. Nothing that stands out too much. Nothing that hurts him either. Goals, oh man. Look, I think, for such a strong profile, for all that devotion in his extracurriculars and the 2 degrees in aeronautical engineering, why consulting? It feels kind of like it feels like a letdown. With that said, I had a colleague of mine from my former life who did his PhD in aeronautical engineering from Cambridge, joined McKinsey, became an engagement manager there, and decided to become a brand consultant. So if you're going to insist on consulting, I would rather see, specialized path, maybe implementation in engineering. The long-term goal is a little bit better, but we can talk about this later, Sam, but this goal to me is not what I would like to see from this candidate.
So the summary here, or the where we're at, is strong profile, 1 clear gap, goals. OB, Arizona Titty Boy is OP's profile. You have gone from you're building rocket ships, and you want to go and tell companies to cut costs and maximize revenue. Yeah, it's going to be an issue. So I like the long-term goals, right? I like this P in aerospace. That makes sense given your background. But I really think that short-term goal should be something niche, something industry specific, something that only you can do, something that uses an MBA, but not just the MBA, that really will grab the reader's attention when they see it. That's interesting. We'd love to have one of our graduates doing that. Now, what could that be? Right, I've done a bit of brainstorming before this session to try and think about what kind of goals might make sense from a short-term perspective. One thing that's interesting, John, is that OP has experience at a big company and a little company, right? A well-known aerospace contractor, but also a small aerospace startup. OP, which did you prefer? Because that might be a narrative, that might kind of spark a narrative. If you really enjoyed the startup environment, that might be a way of saying, I want to go into a startup in this space because I liked wearing many hats, for example. Another angle might be, did you identify or have you identified in your career a particular problem in this space that you want to tackle, right? Maybe it's a problem of, I don't know, aerospace startups can't access funding at the moment. And so you want to go into an area that really tackles that problem, for example. Maybe it's more of a social element, like aerospace currently attracts, I don't know, a lot overrepresented in terms of Chinese and Indian and white, but really underrepresented in other demographics, for example, and you want to tackle that, right? Maybe you want to identify a problem that you can tackle and you build a short-term goal based off that. Another idea is maybe in your work in aerospace, you've identified some niche industry that you think is the future in this space, and you want to move into that. For example, I've got a friend whose startup is creating data centers in space. That's super cool. And maybe you write your goal about, I want to go into this new area of my industry, this sub-industry. Those are all things that only you can do, and you still benefit from an MBA, but only you can do them. And that way you differentiate yourself from the masses of people who are saying consulting is my goal. John, what are you thinking?
I agree. Look, you have the specialized knowledge. You are proficient, and not just in school, but also, across different types of companies that have tackled, aeronautical engineering. And no, you aren't going to brush up against someone in applying who has the same specialized goal that you do. You might, depending on the school, but as soon as you say you want to go into consulting, you're then going to be competing for mind space among others who have, less differentiated professional experience, but maybe even a better GMAT or GRE, and that can impact your chances for admission.
And consultants who've got a guaranteed return offer.
Yeah.
Like, people are getting sponsored, full ride MBA sponsorship from McKinsey with a guaranteed offer to return to McKinsey. If you're AdCom, why would you take the risk on this profile when you've got a guaranteed McKinsey recruit here and McKinsey are paying the fees, so you don't even need to give them a scholarship. You don't want to compete against that.
Yeah. Exactly.
John, let's talk about extracurriculars. How do you see these extracurriculars? So they're here. So at my time at USC, I was lead at the College Propulsion Group, Rocket Propulsion Group, managed multiple rocket engine test campaigns. It sounds really cool. I was also in an engineering co-ed fraternity and held a leadership position there as a new member educator. How do you kind of see that extracurricular paragraph compared to like other clients, other applicants that we work with?
I think it's so focused. I think it's in a good way. You've shown early signs of passion in this industry, having majored in it, but also exercise that passion, doing something about it, and joining this group, managing, getting your hands dirty, trying to build projects as when you're in school. I think that's game changing, and I think this can really help build his narrative around this, being a rocket scientist. And I think that going back to a goal, going to consulting kind of muddies that, right? And I think he has his perfect narrative going, and those extracurriculars, I think they're just perfect.
They're
Yeah,
perfect for setting up that narrative, but there's
correct.
nothing that's recent from what I can tell. My suspicion is that OP doesn't have much of a life outside of work.
I suspect that is true as well. And look, I mean, most adcoms are very lenient when it comes to evaluating people who are consultants and investment bankers or work for Amazon. They know that they don't have the time to engage in extracurriculars. So it's great that OP was able to show that he does things outside of, you know, school, i.e. that lab. And I think that would be enough. I don't think it would raise a red flag, especially if you're able to point to the rigor and the time commitment involved in, this rocket scientist job.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you're right, of course. I would say that if OP is going to be a bit aggressive here and, really
Hmm.
wants to absolutely maximize, and he's asking for suggestions to strengthen my profile, to be fair. So
Yeah.
he's definitely open to this. I would encourage you to first, once you've figured out a more appropriate goal, the next thing I would suggest is we're recording on the 9th of May 2025. You've got until September 2025 to hit submit on your applications. That gives you what, 4 months, whatever, to do to build up your extracurricular profile. There might be some things that you can get involved in even for a relatively short period of time, that can strengthen your profile and particularly strengthen the narrative that you choose to go with. An example would be you have this experience doing mentorship, right? You were a new member educator when you in your co-ed fraternity. What about doing some mentorship in your industry? What about doing some? Maybe there's a group that's involved in mentorship in aerospace, in defense. Maybe your company has an ERG helping certain people, maybe new joiners, whatever, to break into the space. Maybe it's about going back to USC and helping your company to recruit graduates from USC. But just build out your extracurriculars. Show them that you're still involved in that extracurricular life, particularly in the mentorship side. And I think that would strengthen your profile quite a lot, given that otherwise they might question whether you have a life outside of work. Is that fair,
I
John?
agree. Yeah, fair.
Okay, good. So, conclusion, OP is targeting M7 and Stern. Do you think that's fair?
Um, yes, I do think it's fair. I think, the GMAT might be undifferentiating, especially given his demo and, expectation from AdCom, given his profile as a rocket scientist. But I think that's a fair list. I think that's a fair list.
Yeah.
Um,
It doesn't.
provided
It
the
go,
goal
go
is
on.
differentiated. Provided the goal is differentiated, I think schools like Sloan would find his profile interesting, especially when he's all about tackling problems, just coming up with innovative ways to solve the things he sees on an everyday basis.
Yeah. I was just looking through the comments. This commenter has said, need to up the GMAT by 20 or 30 points to be truly competitive for M7, given your ORM background. That's
Mhm.
basically exactly what we've said, isn't it? I think
Yeah, yeah,
I want to steal that comment and echo that comment, which is, yes, you have got everything that you've done so far could set you up for M7, but there's a little bit of a gap in terms of goals and in terms of GMAT, both of which you can improve in the next 4 months. So yes, shoot for M7. Get in touch if we can help. I do think there's an interesting narrative to shape there, but it does need a little bit of work. Okay, John, let's move on to the next profile.
yep.
Profile two, this candidate. So we have, for context, our colleague Mal helps us to compile these profiles by scrolling through Reddit, and she assigns them a tag or a title, and can be sometimes a little bit sassy about it. And the title for this profile is optional essay final boss, and we'll start to see why that's the case. So too long. Didn't read. So summary: 725 GMAT, 2.7 undergrad GPA, poor Miami Latino first gen, good work experience targeting T15, goals, bulge bracket investment bank. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of detail here. So first GMAT. So 725 is the first GMAT attempt. Interesting. There's a bit of background about girlfriend being international, visas expiring. Anyway, so OP's applying now. So I would like to use the MBA to pivot into bulge bracket investment banking for renewables slash infrastructure. Okay, that's not consulting, but it is quite a common goal. So let's see whether that's justified. In college, I was a D1 athlete, but was mugged and severely injured. Next season, I came back, broke my leg, got depressed, became an alcoholic, ended school with a 2.7 GPA and no job prospects. Worked as a business analyst for small technical projects. First for B of A, then on a contract for a few Japanese auto companies. Okay. Then got a job as a Japanese bank lending to energy development companies. End of 2023, started working at a private equity renewables developer doing structured finance. I'd like just jump in here and say, like, amazing rebound, OP. That's really, really impressive. So during 2023, got an offer for a smaller IB team in renewables, was pursuing an MMA career, mixed martial arts, for those that don't know what that stands for, and didn't see the need to work in IB. Okay, given that I can always pivot back to boutique IB or go back to old project financing banks. So basically, quite a windy career narrative here. Now it's 2025. OP has another injury, tore every ligament in my knee. Girlfriend's mum just died. My dad just died. Now I'm worried about my financial future. In college, I didn't know what investment banking was, but I really want to go there now for the high pay, or at least he's being honest about it. Okay, not worried about working 90 hours a week as an investment banking analyst, and wants to do an MBA to pivot back into banking. Maybe wants a T15 MBA potentially, or maybe no MBA at all. Right, John, so much to unpack there. Good luck with your profile evaluation. Over to you.
So key takeaways that I like this guy. I feel for this guy. I think there's going to be a lot of rich stories to uncover from his journey of resilience. Okay, academically, look, we all know that Berkeley has some grade deflation, but man, that 2.7 is rough no matter how many ways you slice and dice it. And yes, there are valid reasons for why being a D1 athlete, going through those injuries will help some of this, but schools have a finite limit, lower limit to folks with sub 3 GPA. So keep that in mind when he applies to some of these schools. So that's, we all know how we feel how I feel about the academics. Professional.
725 offsetting that though. 725 is fairly solid.
It is fairly solid, Sam, but this would mean that schools would have to take in that 2.7 average into their GPA. It's just going to be, I think there's no doubt that schools will deep down know that OP can handle the course load and OP is a smart cookie. OP is analytical, etc. But that 2.7 is something that they have to take into consideration if and when they publish the whole GMAT, the whole GPA range, to US News and in their own website. So
which then affects their ranking.
Correct. And yes, there are schools that are a little bit more lenient when it comes to the lower limits. HBS is one of them, actually. But that's still something to consider in some ways. But anyway, professional. Look, I love any journey of resilience. What OP has accomplished has been fantastic. When I read this, Sam, this LinkedIn headline popped into my head, which is how tearing my ligament training to be an MMA fighter helped me find my way structuring $1 million deals in private equity. That's just like chef's kiss.
I'd click on it. I'd hit like.
But jokes aside, I think I love the progression. I love the focus in the space. We can talk about how that parlays into a goal later on, which I don't really love. But professional pillar is strong. Demographic is also strong. First gen Latino, D1 athlete, underrepresented. So no, that's going to help OP in his applications. Goal wise, look, I think, I mean, having accomplished all of this and stating that you want to go into IB, it's a little bit like you're trying to pop a bottle of champagne and you do it quietly, so it sounds like an angel's fart. Um, the IB goal is fine to leverage, but I would like to see something a little bit more in the renewable space. And as it stands now, not very differentiated. So, Stan, we can talk a little bit about what that goal could look like, but as it stands today, not very differentiated.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so much to get our teeth into. Right. First, I want to explain my comment about the optional essay final boss. So, anyone who has a glaring gap in their profile, anybody watching with a glaring gap, that could be a low GPA, that could be a random recommender, it could be all sorts. Schools give you an optional essay explicitly stating, like a catch-all essay, saying, is there anything else we need to know? Tell us here. And things like, my GPA is lower than I could do because I bust my leg in college. I had to drop out of XYZ class. Um, I have an employment gap on my resume because my dad died and I needed to leave where I was and move across the country to support my mom, for example. All of these like extraneous like circumstances that have affected your journey, those come up in the optional essay. And that's why OP, it's going to be really important that you explain, in particular that GPA, in your optional essay in depth and really explain. I mean, John, you can tell us what a good optional essay looks like, but basically show the rebound, right?
Yeah. I think, a good narrative can be you start with, hey, I recognize that my 2.7 is not reflective of my ability to handle your academic course load. I like to explain the events and circumstances that have led to this 2.7. In lieu of this, I want to offer alternate evidence of my, academic ability, i.e. my 725. Additionally, having dealt with all these episodes in my life showcases resilience, which is an important quality among blah, 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 blah. I think everything sounds genuine, which it is genuine. And I think schools would someone reading this optional essay will no doubt try and find a way to take his side. It's going to be a matter of we love this guy, we love OP. How can we make this work with a 2.7? Let's find a way.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. OP, if you get nothing out of today's call, make a note of what John just said and use that as your optional essay. He's absolutely on point. Okay. One thing that I really like about this profile is this poor Miami Latino first gen. It reminds me of a client I worked with in round 2 last year, who was a Miami Latino as well, who secured the biggest scholarship bundle we have ever seen at Sandweeks Consulting. He had $850,000 of scholarships, a bunch of full rides from a bunch of top schools, like absolutely incredible. And that was largely because he applied via the consortium using the Miami Latino first gen angle. And basically, the consortium makes it really easy to apply to lots of schools. And we'll come to an extreme example of that later. But I would encourage you to really lean into that Miami Latino narrative. Explain how that has shaped you. A lot of schools offer an essay specifically for you to write about your background. And I think schools will appreciate that context. And that is also a big pro for your narrative, particularly when it comes to scholarships, as I've just mentioned. So we've talked about the optional essay. We've talked about the demographic component. Let's talk about goals, John.
Okay.
As a former investment banker myself, I see this and I'd like it to be more specific. I think OP does do a good job of focusing in on this particular area of investment banking that he's been working on in the past. Is there a mention of renewables here? Yes, there you go. MBA pivot to bulge bracket investment banking for renewables / infra. Okay. I think for investment banking to work as a narrative here, you've got to be really specific about which area within investment banking works, where you're targeting. If you just generic throw in that I want to go into investment banking, like it's just not going to stand out. But if you say I want to go into the project finance department of BNP Paribas in New York, focused on infrastructure project finance. Okay, that's specific, that's memorable, and frankly makes a lot of sense. The reason I give BNP as the example is it's one of the investment banks best known for project finance. And if you can show that, and if you maybe expand on that and explain why BNP Paribas, they will see that you've done your research. They will see that you're not just aiming for bulge bracket investment banking because of the pay, even though that's what it is. They will see, okay, there's a good reason for you wanting to go into this space. So be hyper specific about your goals, about which team, which bank, which location. And then I think investment banking can work as a goal. Have I missed anything there, John?
No, I think that's a great goal, and I think that totally makes sense, Sam. I think to go even further, tailoring the school to uh, tailoring the bank or the name of the institution to the school, and citing and reaching out to alumni from the programs who worked at those places
Love
would
that.
show that you are actively doing your homework and reminding the admissions committee that, hey, we've sent someone from our program to this. Obviously, if it's a big well-known bank, but for more niche roles, I think that's going to work even harder.
For example, I want to go to BNP Paribas project finance team doing in renewables and infrastructure in New York. I spoke to Joe Bloggs, graduate of Yale from 3 years ago, who is currently in that team, who explained that how he benefited from the MBA was structured finance training, leadership training, maybe there's some marketing component, etc. So then you can really show, as John says, remind them that they have put people into this goal in the past, in recently, and also it leads on to why you need an MBA to reach that goal specifically, which is just dreamy when it comes to essay flow. Okay, really, really good. OP, look, I think the conclusion here, John, is we like the profile. I think that given the 2.7 GPA, I would want OP to broaden out the school list. I think if you just apply to T15, I think the chances are there's a lot of them that are just going to say, sorry, we can't deal with that GPA. But if OP broadens out to maybe T20, maybe T25, puts enough applications out there, give it with a bit of luck, one of them will bite.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
I'm aligned.
Awesome. Next profile. Okay. Bit sparse, but quite information heavy here. What are my chances at INSEAD or HEC? Profile is Australian, 29 years old, 8 years of experience, currently working as a senior PM in tech, worked with startups, scale ups across product sales and marketing, international background, Muscat and Dubai, lived in 4 countries, undergrad, tier 2 uni in India, IT engineering, 7 out of 10 GPA, postgrad, Monash, 3.7, master of business. Interesting. I hadn't spotted that before, John, but I'm going to ask you whether that affects his ability to get into a Master of Business Administration. GRE, 315 on the first attempt. Again, looking to pivot to investment banking, VC post MBA. Okay. Overall profile evaluation, John. I know information's a bit sparse, but I think we've got enough to work with. What do you think?
I think overall some interesting bits in LP's profile. I think academically, not super competitive. That 7 GPA converts to a below average GPA. That 3.7 helps, but we all know that schools don't quite consider master's GPAs as much as the undergrad. They obviously submit the undergrad GPAs for rankings consideration. And that 315 is going to be a challenge. So I sincerely hope OP is looking to retake the GRE.
Yep.
Professionally, sparse details here. What kind of tech company? Yes, a senior PM does reflect a decent amount of leadership and requires some analytical chops to deploy that leadership. So this is average plus. Would love to know what the scope of the role is, what that firm is, etc. But I'm cautiously hopeful there. Demographically, you're saying Australian. I suspect the OP is Indian Australian, just given the undergrad degree, as well as having worked in those countries. But either way, I think an interesting profile there. Schools definitely see Australia as a URM, underrepresented, so a plus. Even with that ethnicity. Um, Goals, I don't think well, VC, we all know what we think about VC as a goal, Sam. We can recap that during this discussion. But in a nutshell, VCs are tough goals to get into for various reasons, and OP would do better to stick to investment banking. But the real question is, how do you go from tech PM to investment banking, and why? I think that if OP were to focus on the specifics behind investment banking, i.e., going to TMT or a particular focus, and we can talk about ways to rework this goal a little bit. I think that will work better, but I'm just not the dots are not clicking for me for OP's goals, and so for this reason, I'm not convinced. So overall, I think some bright spots in the profile would obviously need to know more, but I'm cautiously hopeful. It's Friday.
Why? Because it's Friday. Okay, let's dive into those goals. What I'm seeing here is that after 8 years, getting moving between tech startups, scale ups, product sales, marketing, promoted all the way to senior PM, you really want to go to an investment bank and spend 90 hours a week doing grunt work as an analyst or as an associate. What? That's a terrible idea. That's a terrible idea. They're going to be the banks taking in associates after MBA are looking to absolutely beast you. It's going to be 80, 90 hours a week. You're not at the point in your life where you want to be doing that. I don't think. I don't see that as a goal. I think the schools are going to see that and think, that's a bit sloppy. I don't think it makes sense. By all means, once you're on the program, if you want to recruit for investment banking, then do it. Fine, go. That's a personal choice. But as far as your narrative goes, I think you're leaving money on the table there. I think that's a real shame. What would be a better goal? I think, John, that a pivot that is closer to home would be better here. So you've been a PM in tech. A narrative that would make sense would be something along the lines of, I've worked in tech in this particular space. Maybe it's, and it doesn't, OP doesn't give any indication of this, but maybe it's like marketing, for example. I've been a tech PM in marketing.
Mhm.
And in my time, I've enjoyed being a tech PM, but I think that that productivity tools is a massive opportunity. So I want to pivot from this particular area of tech as a PM to this particular area of tech as a PM, to this different area of tech as a
Sure.
PM. And here's
Yeah.
why this new area of tech is really meaningful to me and impactful to me, and
Sure.
how I think it can set me up to drive impact at scale.
Sure.
That is a more logical transition, I think. And the schools are going
Yeah.
to see that. And as long as you can convey why that target industry is meaningful for you, they're going to see that and think, yeah, that makes sense. We can place you into that. If
Yeah.
they see investment banking, they're going to be like, really? Are we going to
Yeah.
place you into investment banking? Are we really taking on that risk?
Mhm.
I'm not sure. Thoughts?
I like that. And I think the people may see it as well, can't you just get this PM role to begin with? And I think
Fair.
if OP were to mention, pivoting geographies that, based on the schools, looks like maybe like a PM job in the UK or maybe somewhere in Europe or US schools, I think going from, staying in tech, staying as a tech PM, but pivoting the sector of tech and pivoting geography is enough to warrant the need to build a network and to learn new case studies about this industry. And I think that would I think that makes an okay case, a strong enough case for why OP would want an MBA to make that pivot. I think that closer to home change narrative makes much better sense than an investment banking role for sure.
And that's for the short-term goal. For the
Correct.
long-term goal, maybe VC would work. So, as John
Mm-hmm.
alluded to earlier, we're averse generally to having VC as a short-term goal because VC is a very nepotistic industry. It's very small. They don't have structured recruiting programs. They don't send people to business schools to recruit in the same way that the banks and the consultancies do. So it's worrying when schools see VC as a short-term goal. But as a long-term goal, John, extending that narrative that I was just putting together there about I've worked as a tech PM in this sector and I want to pivot to another sector, it could then be that having built up, startups in this new sector, I want to pivot into VC and start investing in that sector longer term. That
Yep.
could work, right?
Yep. 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 I think that works.
Okay. So short-term goal, probably tech PM, different sector. Long-term goal, VC, investing in that same sector, I think works really, really well. There's one other point that I wanted to say here, which is even if you did say investment banking is your goal, HEC and INSEAD are not the right schools for that. They're just not. I did a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
research before here, and I have the tab ready. I dug out, I wanted to find how many people INSEAD, by the way, INSEAD is the traditionally higher ranked of these two, how many people INSEAD put into investment banking last year. So I did a bit of digging and I found their employment report. And I'm going to have to move my screen a bit to show you this, but that's the top employers of INSEAD in 2024. John, what do you notice here? Number one, McKinsey. Two, BCG. Three, Bain. Four, Strategy and. Five, Kearney. Accenture. Oliver Wyman. Amazon. Deloitte. Eli
All
Lilly.
consulting firms.
There's
You know
not a
what's funny?
single investment bank in that list. And
Yeah.
even hit number two, skip to the because we're going go a little bit further. Apollo Tires, Hilti Group, Roland Berger, and FTI Delta. Not a single investment bank in INSEAD's top employers of 2024. If you want to go to investment banking, if you really want to go to investment banking, if you want to spend all your application massaging your narrative to make it look like investment banking is the right goal for you, and then you want to apply to European school, don't choose INSEAD. LBS, the UK schools. London is the financial hub of Europe still. LBS, Oxford, Cambridge are a push, but really LBS is where you should be focusing your attention. They are far more connected to the City of London, to the investment banking landscape. Anybody else watching that has a profile that is more aligned to investment banking, that is how I would recommend doing it. Okay. Last point then, or two more points on this, John. The GMAT, GRE in this case. OP has taken it once, scored a 315. You alluded to in your intro that OP should needs to be taking it again. What do you reckon is the GRE GMAT level that OP should be aiming for given these schools?
I think with the middling GPA, I think the minimum is probably the low, I would say low 320s for GRE, with a
Okay.
323, 324 plus
Okay.
for it not to be a red flag in OP's application.
Okay.
Ideally, you want to get a 325 plus in order to make up for that for the for that GPA. So my suggestion to OP is stick to aim for mid 320s, land at low 320s at minimum.
Good. Okay, and talking in GMAT terms for anybody watching who's on the GMAT side, I would say that being in line with INSEAD's average is another way of looking at this. And INSEAD's average is about 710 on the old test, 705, 7010 on the old GMAT, which is equivalent to about 665 in the new GMAT. So what John's saying is, 320s on the GRE, 665 or thereabouts, high 600s on the GMAT is where I think we think OP should be aiming. Good. Last question for you, John. OP already has a Masters of Business.
Mm-hmm.
Not an MBA. It's not a Masters of Business Administration, but it looks like OP already has a master's qualification in business.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a plus or a negative for his application?
It's a potential negative. Now, what I mean by this is that there are some schools that allow you to apply even though you have an MBA, but typically you would have to explain why you would need an MBA, and that MBA needs to be typically has to come from a different geography. So it's a pretty common case from applicants from China who did masters in business in top schools, and they want to get an MBA from a US school. And I've seen positive results come out of it. I think with the decent enough explanation, that masters of business won't hurt OP. If anything, that 3.7 will show, some facility with having succeeded in some business courses. But OP would need to use the optional essay to really explain what he'll get in this new MBA program in the US or the UK or Europe that he wasn't able to through the Monash Masters.
I totally agree. Optional essay, perfectly, yeah, perfect for this. Good. Okay. Next profile.
All right.
Profile review. US citizen, US consulting, emerging market leadership, targeting M7. Okay. I'm a dual US citizen who emigrated at 13, completed high school, bachelor's degree from a nationally ranked but not top tier US university, graduating with a 3.56 GPA. Began my career in the US, ERP implementation projects for Fortune 500s at a well-known consulting firm. Was there for only 8 months. My role focused on project coordination, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Later, I received an opportunity to return to my other country of citizenship, a region that has experienced prolonged conflict, but is now entering an emerging market phase. I joined a fintech logistics startup, an early stage where I did warehouse operations, etc. During my time there, my company secured the largest tech acquisition in the country's history. My direct manager was a multiple-time founder in the US with exits over 100 million. He's writing an MBA recommendation letter. Now I'm about to join one of 2 leadership opportunities, either a COO track at the country's largest logistics company, or a commercial strategy leadership role at a company founded by a Goldman Sachs alum, and currently managing partner of the largest PE firm in the country. So some pretty interesting opportunities there that OP is about to go into. Okay. I'm targeting M7, fall 27, applying in 26. So a year away. Long-term goal, I want to use my MBA to work in management consulting. Management consulting? Really? And eventually return to emerging markets to lead private sector reform and business development initiatives. Okay, questions. How should I frame this experience for admissions? Okay, will MBB or IB recruiters in the US value this type of emerging market experience? Okay, how realistic is it to aim for HSW? Should I focus on other M7s? All right, John, lots to sink our teeth into here. How do you see this profile?
Oh, some pluses and some minuses. Let me start with academic. I'm not sure what nationally ranked means because a school that is ranked 100 is also nationally ranked. But I would assume this is a fairly decent school. Without a GMAT or a GRE, there's not much to go off of here with a 3.56. So I will say middling for now, and until we see other details. Professionally, Chief Operating Officer at a 600 mil company with progression. That is a game-changing. That's an exquisite, example of leadership. I love it. There's clear examples of OP having led projects with tangible impact. I love the underserved communities angle. I love everything about what OP has done professionally. So I love this pillar. Not much with demographics, goals. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there, Sam. It makes no sense. Why would you go from chief operating officer, a C-suite at a 600 mil company, probably will be a billion?
To be fair, to be fair, John, it's the COO track. So it might not actually be, it sounds like he isn't actually the CEO, COO of the firm, but he's heading that way.
Okay.
Still, I think your point's valid.
Still, yeah. So you're probably at least a senior vice president. You're someone who's, I think going from there to a consulting firm, even as MBB, doesn't make sense. This is the role that you go to after you exit consulting successfully. You get fed into these companies that were probably clients or companies on the cusp of breaking through. And even if you're not CEO, COO, even if you're TL track. That's a great goal. Where do you go from there? Not consulting. I don't know what's up with OP right now, but I don't love this goal.
Yeah, and he's saying he's even throwing in IB in there as well. I think he's just chasing some money, which is it's fair, but that's not what the schools want to hear. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm looking at this profile. It reminds me of a client I worked with last year who got a full ride scholarship to a top program, he basically had a logistics in emerging markets background. He was in a West African country. Now, and I'm wondering whether he says he comes from an area with prolonged conflict that is now entering emerging markets. Sounds like something similar. So it might be really, really ORM in terms of like schools may never have had anybody from this location before. So that could also be a really, really strong positive. I think given that background, I think conveying the brands on the resume is going to be really important. And I think is also going to be a factor in choosing which of these two roles to go to next. It's going to be crucial that the business school and I'm talking about this from the perspective of an American admissions officer. It's going to be really important that they can see the pedigree and the value of the brands you've worked at. So this might be a case, John, and we've talked about this in the past, of having on the resume, having a brief description of the companies OP has worked at. That might be valid. Um, for example, the client that I referred to before that got the full ride scholarship, he had the UN on his resume. And that UN, even if you've worked, you've spent your entire career in countries that the admissions officers sort of barely heard of, if you got the UN on your resume, they recognize that. You've got Goldman Sachs founder on the resume, they recognize that.
Mhm.
So really important to leverage these brands. The other point, John, I wanted to mention is there's no GRE or GMAT on this evaluation yet. It looks like OP is probably pre-GMAT.
Mhm.
How important is the GMAT going to be?
I think it's going to be important, especially with OP's desire to go to an M7 school with a 3.56. A 3.56 is kind of on the cusp for many of these schools. So you want
Yeah.
to have a GMAT or GRE score that is slightly above the mean. So I'm looking at high 320s, at least the mid 320s minimum, but you want to be mid to high 320s for the GRE, and for the GMAT, probably a 675 plus at minimum.
Do you think? I think you've been a bit harsh there. I think given that given OP has incredible emerging market experience, but also that US work permit.
Yeah,
The school gets the best of like a super ORM
sure.
underrepresented group with the
Yeah,
US work permit.
yeah,
I think the school would tolerate and an in line with average GPA. Their average is like 3.6 or so. I think the
sure.
school would probably tolerate a slightly lower GRE, GMAT than their average to bring in this unusual experience, don't you think?
Yes, you do have a point there, Sam, but I think if we're thinking from the angle of academics helping OP's profile, then what I held just stands. If we are looking at it from the terms of this GPA will neither hurt nor help you, then I think OP will be okay with a 323, 324. Ish for the GRE, and maybe a 655, 665 for the GMAT.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Okay, so to answer the question specifically, because OP did ask some very specific questions here. So how should I frame the experience for MBA admissions? I'll take this one. I think really focus on this experience building or focus the goal around building private sector infrastructure. That's a if I can't I've lost it now, but where does here? Eventually, I want to return to emerging markets to lead private sector reform and business development initiatives. I think building a narrative around emerging market private sector reform is the way to frame this narrative. Don't try and play the like, I really enjoyed solving problems and that's why I want to go into MBB. Like that's been overplayed and that's not where you stand out. I
Mhm.
would prefer, I have this experience leading reform in X area and I've seen the impact it can have in emerging markets like the one I've grown up in, or like the one I have a passport at, and I want to go back and I want to take that development a step further and build out private sector infrastructure, whether it's in digital infrastructure, which is
Mhm.
what OP mentions here, whether it's in logistics. That I think is how you should frame this experience, both from a goals and a past experience perspective. So, John, assuming that we take that a step forward, question two is the is do the will companies, and he's asking about MBB or IB, recruiters in the US value my emerging market leadership, or will it be viewed as less relevant compared to traditional MBA pre-MBA experience? So how do you think recruiters are going to view this experience?
I think they'll view it favorably, and the reason why is because a lot of top consulting firms have cross-market projects, so they don't work, on projects specifically in their own regional silo. They might go across the country. They may go to different markets as well. And I think not only that, but you will also be working with clients who have grown up or have come from emerging markets. So I think having that emerging market experience is valuable to the consulting firm, and I think that will definitely be a point of differentiation there. There are no shortage of people who have traditional pre-MBA experience that MBBs and consulting firms can have the pick of. So I think it's a plus. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think MBB or IB should be OP's goal, but I think recruiters in general, if you, I think, well, it's not about recruiters in general. It's about targeting a very specific niche that you're well suited
Mhm.
to. And I think if you do
Mhm.
that, you will secure post MBA employment, and the schools know that. But again, if you focus on that niche, if you throw yourself into the MBB pool,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think they might worry a little bit. But I
yeah.
think you've got to be niche here. You've got niche experience, you have niche goals that
Mhm.
align with that experience, and I think you'll be fine in terms of recruitment.
Yeah.
Okay, how realistic is HSW? Got to answer the question, John. What do you think?
Um, you know me, Sam. I'm always a diplomat, always trying to say the right things. OP should not apply to HSW. I think everyone deserves a shot applying. I think the I think OP has enough interesting overtures in their profile to be able to weave a story. And if the story is game changing, if the academics, if you know if the GRE GMAT is there, I think there's no harm applying, because in my books, if your chance of getting in is slightly higher than the advertised, the you know the communicated admit rate, then it's worth applying to.
Hmm.
That's my diplomatic answer, Sam. What do you think?
Nah, I think go for it. I mean,
Yeah.
no one no one has a guarantee, obviously, with these schools. HSW incredibly competitive. That advertised admit rate that you refer to is like 10%, right?
Mhm.
But I think OP, if you can, there's three things I need from you for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton that I think you can, that will give you a shot. One, I need to know what those brands are. I mentioned earlier, your brands are going to be really important. And if there are some strong brands buried in there, then that will really, really help. Two, I want to know what that emerging market country is. If it's a country that they've barely received any applications from, I think you're in with a good chance. If it's a country that is emerging market that they've received a lot of applications from, then that's going to be detrimental. So the country I need to know, and three, I need to know the GMAT. I think if you can secure a GMAT around the average of these schools, call it 685 or so, then I reckon go for it. You're in with a chance. And M7, I would say a slightly higher chance. I think if we're given the same criteria, and then I think apply to enough schools, and I think you are in with a chance of an M7 admit. Yeah. Cool.
Good luck.
John. Yeah. And good luck. Good luck. Let us know if we can help. Good stuff. Right. Profile five, John. Next one. So, hi guys. I'd really appreciate your feedback on the feasibility of my application for top business schools. I know I'm aiming pretty high here. I have a non-traditional background in domestic and international development, spent 2 years with Habitat for Humanity, where I was promoted, a year with Bank of America as an analyst, and the last 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Panama. All right, we don't see that every day. I'm looking to get an MBA to break into social impact consulting at an MBB or Big Four. I'm coming out of the Peace Corps in September, so timing is nice, and I think I have enough experience to aim for one now. Okay, good. Target schools, M7, specific focus on Kellogg and Booth. Extracurriculars and other experience. I worked as a manager of a restaurant throughout college. Okay, maybe an optional essay there, potentially. Undergrad, University of Iowa, BBA in economics. I don't think we have a GPA. Or do we? Oh yeah,
We have a
3.81
3.81.
GPA there. Other education coursework, sustainability certificate, right? White USA, male, GMAT 685. Any advice for standing out as a non-traditional applicant? Are these schools in my purview or should I be lowering expectations? Okay, John, profile evaluation. What do you reckon?
I think there are some. I think this is actually a pretty standard MBA profile that I've seen both during my time as an admissions consultant and among my peers at top schools. So academically, fairly strong. Look, it's a non-target school, but a 3.81 is as strong as is a 685. Um, Professionally, look, we're seeing the classic mix of a couple years working for the Peace Corps, Habitat Humanity or equivalent, and then a couple of years working in a corporate job. The balance is ticked slightly more towards the nonprofit end, which is also which can be meaningful especially if OP is able to weave in leadership experience, examples of impact.
Mhm.
I've seen a ton of people succeed applying with the angle of having worked for Peace Corps or Teach for America and a corporate job, in this case Bank of America for OP. So no concerns there. I think it could be a big plus. Demographically white male, but with lots of international experience. So I think this could be interesting for the admissions committee. Goals, yes. I mean, consulting makes sense, and I have seen a lot of folks with this background go into consulting, but I would like to see a little bit more by way of specialization, whether it's going into the nonprofit arms of some of these MBBs, like Bridgespan, which is Bain's nonprofit arm. But I also like to see a little bit more focus on long-term impact, right? What is the MBB a bridge to? That's what I'll be looking to see for goals for it to make sense for me. So overall, I think this is a solid profile. I think there's much more that can be unearthed from the narrative, but over to you, Sam.
Yeah. I think that, okay, if you're going to go with consulting, you're going to go with impact consulting. When you say MBB or Big Four, you got to be really careful how you frame this because, as we know, the risk is that you come across as a generic, I want to go into MBB applicant. I want to refine this down. You've mentioned bridge span. So that's one way of being specific about, as you say, Bain's sort of arm. But there are other leaders in this space that are not MBB and they're not Big Four. The one that jumps to mind is Dahlberg, right?
Mhm.
ERM is another one. Pollination, Systemic. I did a quick search of the big ones. Those are sort of some of the top names in this specific space. Again, when you're in the program, apply to MBB. Do that. Apply to Deloitte. Apply to the Big Four. But for your narrative, as far as your narrative goes, you can signal a focus by targeting, by having your short-term goal as a more specific social impact consultancy like Dahlberg. So that's how I would approach it. John, let's zero in on this professional experience. As you say, it seems to me as a really like wide swing to go from Habitat for Humanity to Bank of America to back to Peace Corps. Like there's such a wide variation there.
Mhm.
It surprises me a little bit, but you seem more sort of familiar with it. How do you see that professional career trajectory?
So the one, going from A to B and sticking with B is the more typical path. I think in hindsight, Sam, going from A to B and going back to A again maybe shows a little bit of uncertainty in the career. But I think, if I think that's what the optional essay and or the narrative will have to demonstrate is like, what are you trying to achieve by going back to working for a different nonprofit? Is it something
Right.
that, did I notice I think it's going to be very hard to spin a narrative where you say, I noticed something at Bank of America that encouraged me to go back to this nonprofit world, because what I'm thinking is that maybe OP wasn't fulfilled by their time at Bank of America and misses, their experience working in nonprofits. There could
Mm,
also be like a microfinance angle. I don't know. But in thinking about this more, I think this might be a little bit of a pink flag. But
mm.
I think the overall mix still okay. I just think there needs to be I think OP needs to explain themselves a little bit better.
Yeah. Okay. So the ultimate question is been asked is, are these schools in my purview? Okay. I think that we've agreed that on at a surface level, yes, like your stats are in line with the averages of these schools, but the narrative, how you thread together how you attach together all these different things you've done and link them to a goal, it's going to be absolutely crucial. So I was doing a little bit of thinking about how you might do that. And like these do feel like a bit of a stretch, but let's sort of just try. One idea is I've always like impact is where is my focus. Maybe you can tie that back to like a childhood experience or something. But when I was working at Habitat for Humanity, I realized that I needed finance skills, hard skills in finance to be able to fundraise, manage donations, understand the finances of the organization. So I spent a year at Bank of America to get those hard skills. When I got what I needed, I moved back into the impact space to implement those skills.
Hmm.
As a volunteer at the Peace Corps in rural Panama, I helped teach Panamanian farmers how to manage their finances, for example. And that way you
Yeah.
can kind of merge together the finances and the impact in a way that sort of sounds logical. Bit of a stretch still, but doable. Another idea is to combine these, and you've just sparked this in my mind, John, is to say, after the MBA, I want to combine my experience at Bank of America with my experience in impact at a like doing microfinancing at a fintech in emerging markets. For
Yeah.
example, the leading fintech doing microfinancing in Panama is called, insert name of random
Hmm.
company here.
Hmm.
They are giving loans, small micro loans to farmers in this area that I've seen, and I've seen how impactful these loans can be. So I want to take my experience from Bank of America in finance and my experience at the Peace Corps doing impact and combine them as a business development manager at a microfinancing firm in fintech in Panama, for example. That's another way that you can draw on both of these experiences and make them sound kind of logical in terms of your
Yeah.
goals. Again, a bit of a
Yeah.
stretch, but hopefully we've conveyed like how you need to be thinking here. And by the way, this is
Hmm.
exactly what an MBA admissions consultant can help you do, and what John and I do
Yeah.
all day with our clients. Okay, excellent. John, any points I've not mentioned here? Any other final parting pearls of wisdom you want to throw out there?
Nope. I love this creative reworking of OP's narrative. I think it makes sense. I think we would need to I think showing evidence of having worked in donations or I basically, maybe during OP's time at Bank of America, joining an ERG or seeding some side projects to show that, hey, I genuinely tried to do something in this space, and I'm going back to nonprofit to implement what I learned versus just, this was just like a temporary thing. So
Or if you
uh,
use it as Bank of America was a tool to
correct.
gain the hard finance skills I needed. So I went
Yeah.
through the structured training program. And by the way, I went through the structured training program at Bank of America myself as
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
as an intern, not an analyst, but same program, where we learned basics of financial modeling, the difference between
Hmm.
DCM and ECM, et cetera,
Hmm.
et cetera. And you could, if you haven't got any extracurriculars, any ERM experience from that time, as John mentioned, you might also
Hmm.
draw on the hard skills from that program as well.
Yeah.
Lots of ways that could be valuable. Okay, think we've conveyed our point. John, final bonus question that I want to throw out there and get your opinion on, because this is one that is on the internet. I saw it come up on my feed the other day. This guy, John, applied to 24 schools, 24 business schools. As you can see from the photo and the stash that he has acquired, he has chosen Berkeley Haas. I don't even know where to start here, John. How many people have you seen that apply to 24 schools?
This is an outsized load even for a hyper ambitious applicant applying to undergrad colleges, and this is undergrad. That's for undergrad colleges. This is for business school. 25 at this point, it just sounds like notches in a belt. I think it's a little bit much.
There's no need for it, is there? So, for context, for those watching, our general advice when people ask how many schools should I apply to, it's a common question people are wondering about, is about 6, 7, maybe at a push. And obviously, and the idea here is that's a balance between the number of times you need to ping your recommenders and get their recommendation versus obviously playing the numbers game. The more schools you apply to, the more you're likely to get into. And the more you're going to be able to get into, the more likely you're to be able to negotiate scholarships. So 6 or 7 traditionally is like a good number. OP has applied, or this person applied to 20 something, 25, 24 programs. Interestingly, in the comments, we have a bit of a breakdown of the schools that he was admitted to and rejected to and from. And we get a bit of an idea of what the breakdown looks like. A bunch of scholarships from a bunch of T15, T20 kind of schools, a bunch of rejections, plus Berkeley Haas, but with no scholarship, a bunch of rejections from M7s here and a few others as well. And then obviously a bunch of wait lists. Now, I would just say, like, anything, if you properly structured your 6 or 7 schools, you would have chosen 3, hopefully 2 or 3 from this batch, maybe a couple of reaches that you would have got rejected to, a bunch of wait lists. Hopefully Haas would have been there in that group, and you would end up in exactly the same situation in terms of outcome as this guy has done, even with 25 schools that he's applied to. I think he's wasted his time and needed an ego boost, John.
Yeah. And that time could have gone towards, look, this is not like applying to having a common app and just throwing as many, darts in the wall and seeing what sticks, right? It's each of these schools requires dedicated school research, which doesn't just mean going to a website and regurgitate, quotes from people. It's talking to people, attending events, sometimes live events, capturing, reflecting your understanding of the school and why you're able to add value to it and what you can get from the program. And applying to all these schools, there's no way OP was able to devote equal attention to any of these schools. And so at some point past those 6 schools, let's say 10, it's a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah, I'm going to push it a step further and say, actually, OP's strategy was shit. If you had focused on 6 schools, put all of this effort into researching the school properly, you probably could have got an admit from Booth. You possibly could have got an admit from Kellogg or Tuck or NYU Stern or one of these other M7s that has turned you down. Instead, you spent your time writing an application for University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is just a complete waste of time. Or OP could have focused on post-MBA like networking and already started setting up, intro calls with people at the companies that he's looking to move into after the MBA. And that would have then in turn, maybe he could have secured a post-MBA recruitment offer before his MBA, which would mean he could have got way more out of his 2 years because he wouldn't have had to spend the time recruiting. In other words, he's wasted a lot of really valuable time on these applications, which I think is a real shame. I would caveat that by saying that OP has probably, in fact, highly likely applied via the consortium. Now, the consortium, for those interested, is a group that helps people from underrepresented backgrounds to apply more efficiently to MBA programs. Basically, you get to combine a few of the essays, so it's less incremental work for each school you apply to. It's still some, but it's less. And so what OP has probably not had to write out a completely full application for all of these schools, but still a lot of work. Now, one other point I want to ask you, John, is OP has got into Haas with no scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
Probably hasn't negotiated there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he should have?
I think you should have, especially when, I mean, our rule is, you're in a position to negotiate if you get a scholarship from similarly ranked school. With that said, I mean,
Oh, he's got Cornell with 60K.
Cornell with 60K is still somewhat game changing, and he's gotten scholarships from a number of other schools too. So there's no harm having asked. I'm good on OP to have gotten in with that GRE score, but even then, he's gotten all these acceptances and scholarships, and you will be doing yourself a disservice without mentioning this in any kind of negotiation letter.
It's another way that he's wasted his time, right? When you were applying to University of Wisconsin, you could have been messaging Haas. Actually, no, probably not, because the timeline's different. But still, I would have strongly encouraged OP to speak to Haas, to reach out to them. They have a person whose job is dedicated to recruiting underrepresented candidates. Speak to them and say, look, I've got an offer from Cornell. It's 60K. Maybe you can't match that, but maybe you can meet me in the middle to make the decision easier. And maybe if Haas came back with 30K, that would be 30K from one email. Good luck getting a
Yeah,
return on,
sure.
on an email equivalent to that anywhere else. Like, I really think OP should have negotiated scholarships. And to be fair, maybe did. But I suspect he was probably too busy applying to these silly schools. Anyway,
Well, Sam, one more thing, Sam. Look, you're applying to 25 schools. Unless OP is getting an application waiver, you're paying 250 to $300 per application.
I
I,
think
I have
consortium
calculated
waives that
this.
a bit, though, no?
Okay. Oh, well, then I rest my case. Well, that's a little bit better because if you applied to these on your own without any assistance, that's 6 to 7K of application fees collectively.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if assuming there's no consortium benefit, then it's $3,000. I'm going to do a quick search here. No, I'm not. I'll do it afterwards, and we'll maybe put it in the comments. But I think consortium might give you a discount of a fee discount. But even so, even if there's a half discount, OP might have spent $1,000 on submitting applications to schools that he's not serious about. So whatever. Each to their own. Okay, John, I think we've made our point there very, very clearly. Really, really nice to see you. As usual, lovely to roast these profiles together. If you're watching and you are considering applying to business school in round one, we are currently taking on clients for round one applications in September. If any of the kind of themes that we've talked about here resonate, feel free to get in touch to add a bit of color about your particular case, and we can hopefully give you some value there. John, been an absolute pleasure, sir. See you next week.
Yeah, next week, Sam.
Take care.